Hi, my name is Efrain Dorado, and this is the presentation that I've created for the final project for my data visualization class. This project involves gathering data from World Cups, which is one of my favorite events. The FIFA World Cup, which takes place every 4 years. The earliest memory that I have of a World Cup is the World Cup from 2002, so that's where I decided to start. I collected data for the stadiums, the attendance, and some other stuff that I'm going to describe in just a minute from the World Cup that happened in Korea, Japan, two countries hosting the event, all the way up until recently with the World Cup in Qatar. So let's talk about the data first. Let's talk about the process of collecting this data, some of the issues that I had, and some ways that we can potentially improve this data set and the project overall. So first of all, the data set that I started with the World Cup in 2002 and all the way down to the 2022 World Cup in Qatar. And then I numbered the games, and there was a reason for this. And the reason is so that I could make a formula to automatically populate the stage. The group stages happen in games 1 to 48. The best 16 happen in the 49 to 56 games, so on and so forth. So that allowed me to create a formula here to filter and auto-populate what type of stage I'm at based on the game number. And then this was one of the hardest parts right here, having to input most of this manually. So looking through sources, yes, the information is all out there, but it's not organized like this. It's not organized in a nice, clean table. So I had to collect all this data. Um, I concatenated the values of the previous two columns here, just make things easier. And then over here, this is the other part that I had to input manually, the recorded attendance for each of the games. The stadium name, the city, the country, latitude, longitude, and capacity. I built a separate table in a different tab that references that information. Because the stadiums were used more than once, this data is going to be used more than once, which I didn't feel like typing this in manually every time. So I created an additional tab and I created a reference filter so that when I tell the chart a stadium name, it auto populates the rest of the data for me. Anyway, as I was going through the project, I realized that the World Cup that happened in 1998 in France was also played under this format. So to improve this project, I could add the games for the World Cup in France, since it was also played under the current 32 team format with 64 games. That is going to change in the coming World Cup. The World Cup is going to expand, it's going to have more teams. Um, I'm not sure how I feel about that personally, but going back to the project, using the table here, I built several pivot charts and I built another tab with some other calculations, which will allow me to create some of the graphs in the dashboard. This is the tab that displays the dashboard. So using the data and some formulas, I was able to compute the highest attended game, which was recently actually. It happened in Qatar in Lusail Stadium. Well, if I go to the data set of the stadiums and I look at the Lusail Stadium in Qatar right here, its capacity is huge. It's 88,000 people, which the closest stadium to it, if I recall correctly, is the stadium in Johannesburg in South Africa. And also, nope, I was mistaken. I thought that the Olympic Stadium in Berlin was up there, but no, the Olympic Stadium is only at 74,000. And also, the stadium in Maracanã in Brazil is also at 74. So, yeah, the World Cup in Qatar had the stadium with the highest capacity, which they did fill for the last final played between Argentina and France. Then, using the main data set, I determined which country has had the most games played since 2002. And to my surprise, it's two of them, Germany and Brazil, with 34 games each, which is incredible. So I thought France will be up there too, but France had some very poor showings in earlier World Cups. And this could be another table that we can create. We can break it apart by countries and see how many games they played in total. I didn't do that one here, but that's an idea as well. Add that chart, you know, create a big chart with all the countries and their appearances. That will be another interesting chart to add to the dashboard. All in all, the country that has had the most attendance by people is Brazil, and the one that was the least attended was the World Cup back in Korea, Japan. And then, using some pivot tables and using the calculation stuff, I created a handful of charts here. The mean of average attendance by World Cup and by stage, all clustered here. And the way pivot charts work is the way they filter the data, it will allow me to filter the chart itself. Like, for instance, if I only want to look at the group stages for each World Cup, boom, here it is. And then I can compare the mean of average attendances by group stages of every single World Cup here. I can clean the filter and let's go to the final, which is the most exciting game in the whole tournament. And you see how the chart auto fits itself. And then if I want to add another filter here, I can also look at each World Cup individually. So let me look at Russia. That's the final, but I want to look at all the stages for this particular World Cup. And I have them right here. So yeah, pivot charts are a really amazing way to display data and to filter data within a chart. Here is a chart that displays the combined attendance versus capacity of all the World Cups. So, as you can see by looking at the two charts, I'm sorry, at the two bars in the chart, Brazil and Russia are the ones that were the most close to one another as far as the total capacity of their venues and the number of people that attended the event. The least attended one was back in 2002, Korea, Japan. And I will say part of the issue is having the tournament being hosted in two countries that you need to travel by plane or by ship to get to. It made things a little inconvenient. It made fans either go to the games in Korea or go to the games in Japan because of how expensive it would be to travel between the two countries back and forth. It was a really cool concept, but unfortunately, by looking at this data, we can see that as far as attendance, it wasn't as successful as it could have been had it been hosted in just one country, or if the two countries are hosting the event, to have transportation between the two countries be easier than ships and planes. And then, for people who are not super duper familiar with the way the World Cup works, group stages have the most games by far. Um, and this shows a percentage of the distribution of the games. This chart right here, I really haven't talked about much about the stadiums and the purpose of gathering data in the stadiums. So I built this chart for the stadiums. And if you look at here, we're looking strictly at Russia, at the cities in Russia. This chart can be filtered by city, stadium name, country. Country will be the better one here. For instance, let's look at South Africa. And did you notice that Johannesburg and Moscow both have? Let me add Russia just so that I can I can clarify this aspect of the graph here. Look at Johannesburg and Moscow. Two bars stacked. Why? Well, the reason why is because those two cities are host to two different stadiums. That's why. And then the other chart that I added here was the recorded attendance by country. Right now it's displaying Brazil. I can filter this to, let's say, just Qatar. Let's see. And then it also shows the city and the attendance at that particular city, which in this case, Doha in Qatar had the most attendance. If I look at Russia, I'm thinking Moscow and St. Petersburg are going to be at the top. And sure enough, here is Moscow, here is St. Petersburg. If I look at Germany, probably Bavaria and Berlin. Well, here is Munich, Bavaria, and Dortmund actually, and Berlin. Actually, those three actually had quite high numbers. But yeah, I could add more charts to this dashboard. I just didn't want to make it super duper crowded. But with this data set, we can continue filtering it and adding more pivot tables, which we can turn into charts. There is one more chart that I want to go over with you guys before we close up the presentation, and that would be the three-dimensional map that I created. There was a purpose of collecting data on latitude and longitude and being specific about the city and the country. So I created 7 different tours. Each tour covers the one country that has hosted the World Cup since 2002. And the three-dimensional chart here shows the location of the venues in a map. And I built a little label here with color codes to identify the different cities. When I click on a bar, it displays the name of the stadium, the capacity, and its latitude and longitude coordinates. This is the data card that I created for each of these stadiums. Look at Jeju all the way over here. Then we can go to Japan and just go around the different venues here. Look at Germany. So this gives us an idea of where the stadiums are located. I mean, a lot of us are familiar with some geography, but we are probably not aware of how far apart two cities are between one another, and the way that the stadiums are distributed throughout a host country. If we look at South Africa and Russia, St. Petersburg is the northernmost city to host a World Cup game. And if I look at South Africa, Cape Town over here is the southernmost city to host a World Cup game. So we can get interesting data, interesting conclusions from these maps. Anyway, this has been my presentation. Just to summarize it, it involved collecting data for World Cups from 2002 to 2022, um, cleaning up the data, creating dashboards to compare attendance and percentage of attendance, not just raw attendance. Oh, I misspelled that. Dashboard. My apologies, it was misspelled. Anyway, thank you so much.